2014 South Australian state election. The 2014 South Australian state election elected members to the 53rd Parliament of South Australia on 15 March 2014 to fill all 47 seats in the House of Assembly Lower House and 11 of 22 seats in the Legislative Council Upper House. The 12-year incumbent Australian Labor Party SA government, led by Premier Jay Weatherill, won its fourth consecutive four-year term in government, a record 16 years of Labour government, defeating the opposition Liberal Party of Australia SA, led by opposition leader Stephen Marshall. The election resulted in a hung parliament with 23 seats for Labour and 22 for the Liberals. The balance of power rested with the two crossbench independents, Bob Such and Geoff Brock. Such did not indicate whom he would support in a minority government before he went on medical leave for a brain tumor, diagnosed 1 week after the election. University of Adelaide professor and political commentator Clem McIntyre said the absence of Such virtually guaranteed that Brock would back Labour with 24 seats required to govern. Brock duly provided support to the incumbent Labour government, allowing Weatherill to continue in office as head of a minority government. McIntyre said, "If Geoff Brock had gone with the Liberals, then the Parliament would have effectively been tied 23 to 23. So once Bob Such became ill and stepped away, then Geoff Brock, I think, had no choice but to side with Labour. It is Labour's longest-serving South Australian government and the second longest-serving South Australian government behind the Playmander-assisted Liberal and Country League government of 1933–1965, which served first under Richard Leighton Butler and then Thomas Playford Roman IV. It is also the third time that any party has won 4 consecutive election victories in South Australia, after the LCL 10 consecutive victories from 1933 to 1965, the last 8 under Playford, and Labour's 4 consecutive victories between 1970 and 1977 under Don Dunstan. Recent hung parliaments occurred when Labour came to government in 2002 and prior to that when the state Liberal retained government in 1997, which saw the South Australian division of the Liberal Party of Australia, created in 1974, win re-election for the first time. The Liberals were reduced to 21 seats in May 2014 when Martin Hamilton Smith became an independent and entered cabinet with Brock. Both Hamilton Smith and Brock agreed to support the Labour government on confidence and supply while retaining the right to otherwise vote on conscience. Labour went from minority to majority government when Nat Cook won the 2014 Fisher by-election by 5 votes from a 7.3% two-party swing, which was triggered by the death of Such. Despite this, the Jay Weatherill Labour government kept Brock and Hamilton Smith in cabinet, giving the government a 26 to 21 parliamentary majority. Like federal elections, South Australia has compulsory voting, uses full preference instant runoff voting in the lower house, and single transferable vote group voting tickets in the proportionally represented upper house. The election was conducted by the Electoral Commission of South Australia (EXA), an independent body answerable to Parliament. Results: House of Assembly. The Liberals took 3 seats from Labour, resulting in a hung parliament with 23 seats for Labour and 22 for the Liberals. The balance of power rested with the two crossbench independents, Bob Such and Geoff Brock. Such did not indicate who he would support in a minority government before he went on medical leave for a brain tumor, diagnosed 1 week after the election. University of Adelaide professor and political commentator Clem McIntyre said the absence of Such virtually guaranteed that Brock would back Labour with 24 seats required to govern. Brock duly provided support to the incumbent Labour government, allowing Premier J. Wetherill to continue in office as head of a minority government. McIntyre said, "If Jeff Brock had gone with the Liberals, then the Parliament would have effectively been tied 23-23. So once Bob Such became ill and stepped away, then Jeff Brock, I think, had no choice but to side with Labour." In a joint press conference with Wetherill, Brock said Such's absence prompted him to make his decision a week sooner than planned. The new government was sworn in on 26 March, with Brock in cabinet as Minister for Regional Development and Local Government. The Liberals were reduced to 21 seats in May 2014, when Martin Hamilton Smith became an independent and entered cabinet as Minister for Investment and Trade, Defence Industries and Veterans Affairs. Both Hamilton Smith and Brock agreed to support the Labour government on confidence and supply while retaining the right to otherwise vote on conscience. Labour achieved majority government when Nat Cook won the 2014 Fisher by-election by 5 votes from a 7.3% two-party swing, which was triggered by the death of Such. Despite this, the J. Wetherill Labour government kept Brock and Hamilton Smith in cabinet, giving the government a 26-21 parliamentary majority. Independents Bob Such, Jeff Brock. Although the statewide two-party vote 2PP was 47.0% Labour v 53.0% Liberal, the Adelaide metropolitan area, containing over 75% of South Australia's population and 72% of seats, 34 of 47, recorded a 2PP of 51.5% Labour v 48.5% Liberal. Seat movement. The following seats changed hands. Pendulum. The following Mackerras pendulum works by lining up all of the seats according to the percentage point margin on a two-candidate preferred basis based on the 2014 results. Safe seats require a swing of over 10% to change. Fairly safe seats require a swing of between 6 and 10%, while marginal seats require a swing of less than 6%. Legislative Council. One appointed by casual vacancy in 20,000, 112 elected from Labour ticket became independent in 2011. 8. The last state election was held on 20 March 2010 to elect members for the House of Assembly and half of the members in the Legislative Council. In South Australia, Section 28 of the Constitution Act 1934, as amended in 2001, directs that parliaments have fixed 4-year terms, and elections must be held on the third Saturday in March every 4 years unless this date falls the day after Good Friday, occurs within the same month as a Commonwealth election, or the conduct of the election could be adversely affected by a state disaster. Section 28 also states that the governor may also dissolve the assembly and call an election for an earlier date if the government has lost the confidence of the Assembly or a bill of special importance has been rejected by the Legislative Council. Section 41 states that both the Council and the Assembly may also be dissolved simultaneously if a deadlock occurs between them. The Electoral Miscellaneous Amendment Act 2013 introduced set dates for writs for general elections in South Australia. The writ sets the dates for the close of the electoral roll and the close of nominations for an election. The Electoral Act 1985 requires that, for a general election, the writ be issued 28 days before the date fixed for polling S47 TWOA and the electoral roll be closed at 12 noon, 6 days after the issue of the writ S48 3I. The close of nominations will be at 12 noon 3 days after the close of rolls. Electoral Act 1985 S48 FURA and S4ON. Since the previous election, 5 new parties had registered: Fishing and Lifestyle Party, Liberal Democratic Party, Multicultural Progress Party, Stop Population Growth Now, and Katter's Australian Party. 6 were no longer registered. The Democrats, save the RAH Gamers for Croydon, Democratic Labour Party, One Nation, and United Party. Polling day for the 2014 South Australian state election was Saturday, 15 March 2014 from 8 am until 6 pm. The issue of writ for the 2014 South Australian state election was Saturday, 15 February 2014. The electoral roll closed at 12 noon, Friday, 21 February 2014. Nominations for candidates wishing to stand for election closed at 12 noon, Monday, 24 February 2014, with the ballot order for both houses drawn and released shortly after, followed by close and release of upper house above-the-line preference tickets. Lower house how to vote card lodgements closed at 12 noon, 7 March 2014. The 2014 Tasmanian state election occurred on the same day. Background: the centre-left Australian Labor Party, led by Premier Jay Weatherill, and the centre-right Liberal Party of Australia, led by Leader of the Opposition Stephen Marshall, are the two main parties in South Australia. In the 2010 state election, of 47 seats total, the Labor Party won 26 seats and the Liberal Party won 18 seats. 3 seats were won by independents: Bob Such-Fisher, Jeff Brock-Frome, and Don Pegler Mount Gambier. Smaller parties which held no seats in the lower house but achieved significant votes in 2010 include the SA Greens and the Family First Party. In the upper house, the Labour Party held 8 seats, the Liberal Party held 7 seats, the SA Greens, the Family First Party, and No Pokies all held 2 seats each, and Dignity for Disability held 1 seat. A Port Adelaide by-election and a Ramsay by-election occurred on 11 February 2012. Labour retained both seats. Retiring MP. Labour: Lynn Bure MHA Giles, Patrick Conlon MHA Elder, Robin Gerati MHA Torrens, John Hill MHA Kawana, Michael O'Brien MHA Napier, Gay Thompson MHA Raynell, Michael Wright MHA Lee, Carmel Zalo MLC. Liberal: Ivan Venning MHA Schubert, Other, and Bressington MLC. Redistributions and the two-party vote. To produce fair boundaries, which has a history going back to the mid-1900s Playmander, the Electoral Commission of South Australia has been required following the 1989 election to redraw boundaries after each election through a fairness provision with the objective that the party which receives over 50% of the statewide two-party vote at the forthcoming election should win the two-party vote in a majority of seats. Labour's success in South Australia since the end of the Playmander has been based in part on the strength of its dominance in Adelaide. South Australia is the most centralised state in Australia, while 1.7 million people live in South Australia. 1.3 million of them live in Adelaide uniquely, over 75% of the state's population, and 72% of seats, 34 of 47, are located in the metropolitan area alongside a lack of comparatively sized rural population centres. Therefore, to a far greater extent than is the case in the rest of Australia, the metropolitan area tends to decide election outcomes. Under normal conditions, Labour wins the most seats in Adelaide, with the Liberal vote locked up in ultra-safe rural seats. In 2010, for instance, the Liberals picked up a swing of 8.4%, more than the uniform 6.9% swing that the Boundaries Commission envisaged as being enough for a Liberal win. However, most of that swing came in seats that would have stayed in Labour hands in any event. While 22 seats saw double-digit swings, Labour sat on insurmountably safe margins in 16 of them. Additionally, while the Liberals took 3 Adelaide area seats off Labour, it only won 6 additional seats in the capital. 6 of the Liberals' 13 safe two-party seats were urban. All but one of their 4 marginal seats were urban. A result, while the Liberals won 51.6% of the two-party vote, Labour only suffered an overall 3-seat swing, allowing it to hold on to a 2-seat majority. The 2014 election saw more of the same. While the statewide two-party vote 2PP was 47.0% Labour v. 53.0% Liberal, the metropolitan area recorded a 2PP of 51.5% Labour v. 48.5% Liberal. The Liberals only won 12 of the 34 metropolitan seats, while only 4 of their 14 safe two-party seats were urban. All 8 non-safe 10% seats were urban. Overall, the election resulted in a hung parliament, with 23 seats for Labour and 22 for the Liberals. The balance of power rested with the 2 crossbench independents, Bob Such and Jeff Brock. Their seats, Fisher and Frome, both returned clear Liberal two-party votes but elected independents. 24 seats had returned a Liberal two-party vote, 23 seats returned a Labour two-party vote, therefore the fairness provision was met. One element of the Playmanda remains. To this day the House of Assembly is still elected using single-member seats. Prior to the Playmanda, the House of Assembly had always been elected using multi-member seats since the inaugural 1857 election. Each Labour period of government since the end of the Playmanda had at least one comprehensive win, allowing often Liberal seats to be won by Labour candidates who then built up incumbency and personal popularity. Examples in 2014 were Mawson, Newland and Light, and additionally in 2010, Bright and Hartley all gained at the 2006 election landslide. Mawson in fact swung toward Labour in 2010 and 2014 despite the statewide trend. The bellwether seat of Colton was retained by Labour. Furthermore, all but 2 of the 9 Liberal-held metropolitan seats saw swings against the Liberals. In 2014, referring to the 1989 fairness legislation, Premier Jay Weatherill said, complaining about the rules: "When you designed the rules, I think sits ill on the mouth of the Liberal Party," while Electoral Commissioner Kay Mousley said it was an impossible task for the Boundaries Commission to achieve the legislated requirement, stating it is a constitutional requirement, and until the Constitution gets changed, I must say I find it a very inexact science. Additionally, she had previously stated in 2010, had the Liberal Party achieved a uniform swing, it would have formed government. The Commission has no control over, and can accept no responsibility for, the quality of the candidates, policies and campaigns. University of Adelaide professor of politics Clem McIntyre stated after the 2014 election that fair electoral boundaries are an impossible challenge. The Liberal Party disagreed with that assessment and submitted that Hartley, Elder and Bright should be moved from Labour to Liberal. The Australian Broadcasting Corporation's election expert Anthony Green expected that the Labour government's parliamentary majority from the 2010 election would be redistributed away. However, the draft redistribution, which altered the boundaries of 36 of 47 seats, nominally gave Labour 26 seats and the Liberals 21 seats on a two-party basis. Although held by an independent member, Frome was proposed to be moved from Labour to Liberal on a two-party basis. It was also proposed that the Norwood be renamed Dunstan. The final redistribution was released in August 2012. The renaming of the seat of Norwood to Dunstan occurred. On Anthony Green's calculations, the notional two-party margin in Frome went from 0.1% Labour to 1.7% Liberal. Ashford went from 4.8% to 0.0%. 6% for Labour, Hartley went from 3% to 0. Row. 1% for Labour, Elder went from 6% to 0% for Labour, and Light went from 3% to 8% for Labour, amongst other boundary and margin reductions and increases. All redistribution figures and swings used are based on Anthony Green's booth-based declaration vote calculations, rather than the Electoral Commission's seat-based declaration vote calculations. Polling. Polling conducted by Newspoll and published in The Australian was conducted via random telephone number selection in city and country areas. Sampling sizes usually consisted of over 800 electors, while the 10/13 March 2014 poll consisted of 1,602 electors. The declared margin of errors at these sample sizes were +3.5% and +2.5% respectively. Two-party preferred figures were calculated based on preference flows at the 2010 state election.